This is the Polyend Play Plus, and it's a device made by the Polish company Polyend. It was released in late 2023 as an upgrade to its predecessor, the Polyend Play. At the time of writing, both devices are still sold and supported, although the Play is now described by Polyend as a legacy product. The main features that were added to the Plus were as follows: onboard synthesizers and stereo sample playback capability. The Polyend Play Plus is a sequencer and sample player with 16 tracks. It also has synthesizers. Up to 3 multi-timbral polyphonic synth engines can be used per project. Samples in this machine, unlike the original Play, can be stereo. The Play Plus has an audio over USB function. Let's talk about dimensions. The unit is approximately 11 by 8 inches. It's about 3/4 of an inch high, not including the knobs, and it's lightweight. It's only about 2.65 pounds, but it feels very well made and very sturdy. The Play Plus has a small but very clear OLED screen for viewing information, usually split into 2 halves. It has 16 endless rotary encoders, or knobs if you prefer, for altering parameters, and 11 square buttons. One of these is the red play button, which shows the progress from left to right as a sequence or pattern is playing. There's also a screen knob which has a detent and can also be pressed. This acts as a kind of master knob and is also an endless encoder. The device has a 16 by 8 grid of small backlit pads. These pads are not touch sensitive. The 16 by 8 grid has several modes. Sequencing mode, which we can see here. You can add notes to a sequence simply by pressing the pads and delete them by pressing the pads again. You either sequence samples that you load in or notes from the internal synths. With these pads lit green, you can only sequence the samples you load in to the machine. If you hold shift and patterns, audio stroke MIDI, and these pads turn magenta, then you can sequence the internal synths or external MIDI gear. Here I've got a little drum pattern that I've sequenced using the Perk drum synth. And you can see these pads are lit here, and it's pretty straightforward. What I've got here is a bass drum, a hi-hat, a snare, a hi-hat, and so forth. Tracks are played back from left to right across this grid, which obviously only shows 16 steps out of a possible 64 at a time, but the other 48 can easily be accessed by simple button combinations. Now we can show a different screen here. Now if I press this patterns button here top right, this shows the sequencing of patterns. It's a kind of song mode, and there's only one here because I've only made one pattern so far, but each one of these pads can be an actual pattern, and so you can have a song that goes right across these pads. But we'll come back to that in real detail later on. If I press this button next to the play button marked perform, and we have these lovely colours come up, this is performance mode, and this gives us non-savable effects that can be applied to audio tracks. Some of these work with the MIDI tracks, but not all as things stand. The grid can also be used as a piano roll for viewing the actual pitches of notes in single tracks, and it can also be used to name projects and folders, but you know, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit here. I'll come back to that later on in these videos. Over on the right hand side there's also a 4 by 8 grid which houses the buttons, pads if you like, which are used for mute and solo and variation and select. When these are lit green, they are linked to the 8 audio sample tracks, and when lit purple, like I said, they are linked to the 8 MIDI tracks or the 8 synth tracks. So the 8 tracks in this mode can only be synth or external MIDI. So you've got to use these judiciously. You know, you might want to have 4 MIDI tracks and 4 synth tracks, or 6 synth tracks and 2 MIDI tracks. You know, you have to divide it up. The mute and solo buttons here are global to all patterns and cannot be programmed to patterns individually in each project. This grid over here also serves as a vertical keyboard. You can see this is now a vertical keyboard for inputting notes and playing recording live. but I'll come back to that later on. At the rear of the machine is the power button, the USB-C socket for the power supply. The device is not battery operated, but it can be powered via USB or a suitable power bank. I simply plug mine in to my USB hub that I've got plugged into my Mac. The micro SD card slot is in the back where the supplied micro SD card is housed, and there are 3 MIDI jack sockets for MIDI in, MIDI out and audio out. MIDI data can be sent to external devices to trigger sounds. Like I've said, up to 8 tracks can be created in addition to the 8 internal. Let's talk about the file hierarchy. At the top of the file hierarchy is a project. Each project can contain up to 20 folders of samples, with a maximum of 255 samples in total in the pool. Samples can be loaded as packs, which is recommended, folders or individually. 10 to 20 folders is recommended. The Play Plus's internal memory for loading samples is fairly small. I think it's around 30 megabyte though. It may be different for the Play Plus, that was for the Play, so it might be a bit more for the Play Plus, but anyway, it's not, a huge memory. Unused samples can be deleted to save space. In other words, if you load in an entire folder's worth of samples and you don't use them all, you can delete the ones you don't need and that will free up some space. The mono maximum sample time is 6 minutes, and stereo maximum sample time is obviously only half of that at 3 minutes. Projects can be named by the user or auto-named by the device. So with this little project I've got here, I'll show you. There we are, that's my little pattern that I created using the Perk synth. If I press the screen knob and go to File and go to Save Project, okay, I've called it Les Play Plus 1, but I could have called it something else. If I go to File, Save Project As, and I press Save, then I could have an auto name. So if I press that, Thoughtful Swim comes up. Press it again, Offbeat Cat, Cable Fact. We've got a QWERTY keyboard on the display, and that's accessed either by using the screen knob or pressing the buttons. You can see this red pad here represents this red one here. These 2 pads represent backspace, these 2 represent caps lock. This is the F and the J for reference, and all of these pads here are part of the space bar, so you soon find your way around it. But we're not going to change the name of this project for the moment. Come back. So each pattern in a project can have 8 audio tracks, we've got the green lights here, plus 8 MIDI stroke synth tracks, with up to 64 steps, or if you like 4 bars in each track. Each track can have 16 variations, only one of which can be played at a time per pattern. And I'll talk about variations again a bit later on in the tutorial. Patterns and tracks cannot be named, sadly. So like I said, in pattern mode, up to 128 patterns can be chained together for sequential continuous playback, so kind of a song mode. The pattern master, pattern stems, chain master and chain stems can be exported for use in a DAW on your computer. So saving and loading. To load something, you press the screen knob, choose File, Open Project. Okay, press that, and then you can scroll down to a folder of your choice, and then obviously if you click it, it will load in. You say yes or no to saving current project. So if I go to this one here, let's go into these demo projects, and if I go to this one here, if I say open, this one's opening because I've already saved my previous project. So it takes quite a long while to open projects, obviously depending on how much data there is in the project, but it's quite a long time. I'll speed the video up at this point so I don't bore you to death. Okay, so I've reloaded my Les Play Plus 1 project. So if you want to save a project, again press the screen knob, File, Save Project or Save Project As. So if you want to change the name of a project, you can do it there. I showed you that earlier, I'm not going to do that. When you turn the Play Plus off, it will retain its current state, so it's not necessary to save before switching off. If you get a bit lost while working on a project, simply load it back in. You can plug the Play Plus into a powered speaker by means of the audio output. to the rear of the machine. This is a stereo mini jack, so not a professional kind of thing, but it's fine. I personally haven't experienced any problems with this. The output's stereo. For greater control on your computer, use your audio interface and a DAW. I've got a mixer over to the left here, so I plug the play into 2 channels on my Yamaha MG12 mixer, and then I send the sound of the mixer into 2 inputs on my Focusrite Scarlett 8x16 audio interface. Then I use Reason software on my computer. I just have a stereo channel there that I run everything through, so everything that goes into my mixer goes into Reason. It's just an easy way of doing it, and that's how I'm running things at the moment. Of course, you can always plug a pair of headphones into the Play Plus or your audio interface, but being careful that you don't damage your hearing, so turn the master volume of the play down before you do this and gradually bring the level up. Obviously, if you connect external MIDI devices to the Play Plus, you'll have to use more channels on your mixer or in your DAW. You can also monitor the audio of the Play Plus by means of USB through a computer. You simply make the Play Plus the audio interface on your computer. I can't do that in Reason because I can't set a different in and an out, but if you use something like Ableton Live or Logic, you can do that, and it works really well. So the Play Plus is different to the Play because it has the synths. There are 5 different synth engines to choose from. You can only use 3 of these at a time in one project. Plus, you can only use 1 patch per synth engine per project. Although if you want to, you can set 2 or more synths to the same engine. These synths are only available on the MIDI tracks. So if you use, say, 3 synth sounds on separate tracks, you'll only have 5 external MIDI tracks available for sequencing other gear. And I mentioned that earlier, didn't I? Let's have a look at these synth engines. Let's press the screen knob, go to Synths, and you can see that Synth 1 is set to VAP, that's the virtual analog poly synth. Synth 2 is set to Perk, that's the kind of drum synth, and Synth 3 is set to WT-FM wavetable FM synth. So if I click Synth 1 and click again on model, I can scroll through the various models. That's what it's set to: VAP, virtual analog poly. We can have WT-FM, wavetable FM, the Perk synth. Go back, you've got acid, you've got fat. So the 5 possibles are acid, fat, VAP, WT-FM and Perk. And obviously before you start work, although you can do it at any time of course, you choose whichever synth you want to be, synth 1, synth 2, synth 3, and then you can edit the patches. Again, this is for later on. So the synth engines are acid, which is the single oscillator monophonic analog synth; fat, which is the classic analog 3 oscillator synth; VAP, which is the virtual analog polysynth; WT-FM, which I said is a wavetable FM 2 operator FM synth, a bit like a DX7; and Perk, which is a drum synth. So I suggest you do this before you start working on your project. Press the screen knob, click Synths. Now you can see the 3 synths here are Synth 1, VAP, Synth 2, Perk, Synth 3, WT-FM. So if I wanted to change Synth 3, I'd click it, I'd go to model, I'd scroll to the model if I wanted to change it, supposing I want fat, okay, and I click that. Now if I come back, you'll see Synth 3 is now fat, Synth 1 is VAP, Synth 2 is Perk, and then you can go on and you can pick patches from those synths and you can use them. So you can see I've got some notes that I've sequenced. I showed you this earlier, that's that little drum pattern. If I just touch this select pad here, you can see I'm using Synth 2, the Perk synth. Click it again, make it go out. This one here, I haven't chosen the synth yet, so if I turn the sample button, nothing's going to work because I haven't got anything inputted. So if I put a note in, click that, and now I can change that. I can choose one of the 3 synths, or I can choose any of the USB channels or any of the jack channels. That's the MIDI channels that I access from the jack, the TRS jack in the back, and again we'll get to that later on. So I'll bring this back to, I don't know, synth 1, which is the VAP. You can only have 3 synths at a time. I've chosen fat for that one now, but this one is the Perk. for the drums. Now, if I go to this one here, track 2, and I turn that one off, I've got fat. Right, if I press, go into this patch, it says init, that's the initial patch. So if I press that again, I've got a whole long list of patches, and when I click one of these, then that will take me into that patch and edit patch, and you've got all these parameters. It's a little bit fiddly to edit patches, but it's perfectly doable. I've got a Polyend Tracker Plus, which is a lot easier to edit synth patches on. I've also got a Polyend Synth, and the synth patches are interchangeable between those machines. So init is the initialized patch, so it's kind of a plain vanilla patch for you to build your sound. In this window you've also got important items like the polyphony you're setting, how many voices for the synth, the gain, the panning, that kind of thing. You've only got 8 voices available between the 3 synth engines, so you have to choose your polyphony wisely, and you'll obviously need 3 or more voices to play chords. The 3 synth engines, by the way, have designated colours. So synth 1 is violet, synth 2 is yellow, and synth 3 is green. So synth 1 is violet. If I change the synth to synth 3, and you can see that's gone green now, and synth 2 is yellow. So you know which synth you're using at any one time. The great thing about these devices, of course, is that you're not stuck with having one sound on one track. I could have a couple of these pads using synth 2, I could have a couple using synth 3, and same with the samples. You can put any sample on any pad, although I have to say I do tend to use tracks exclusively for one sound, otherwise it gets a bit confusing. I'm guessing that synth sounds use up much less RAM, so it's probably a good idea to use them rather than samples where you can, although I can't swear to that, of course. So like I said, it's worth noting that all of the synth engines found in the Play Plus are also found in the Tracker Plus, the Tracker Mini and the Synth, which also has the PHZ and PMD synth engines but not the perk. Therefore any patches created on one machine can be used on any of the others, provided the relevant synth engine exists on that machine. Unfortunately, the original Tracker and Play do not have any onboard synth engines and only play mono samples. So that's probably a good place to stop this first video on the Polyend Play Plus. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel, and you'll see me in my next video where I'll go into more detail about the samples and lots of other good stuff. Thanks very much for watching.